Tell Earth their favorite alien learned her place. That was the last thing the VARC broadcast before every screen in the Sol system went black. For 6 seconds, no one on Earth moved. Not in the kitchen of a farmhouse outside Des Moines, where a 12-year-old girl named Maggie Sullivan stood barefoot in front of the television with a half-eaten bowl of cereal in her hands. Not in a firehouse in Queens, where 6 firefighters had stopped mid-card game to watch Ambassador Leora Vin speak from Mercy Spire. Not in the Oval Office, where President Laura McKenna lowered one hand slowly from her mouth and stared at the frozen image of Leora on the wall. Then the feed died, and the world did not scream. That was what frightened the aliens most, though they did not understand it yet. Earth went quiet. No angry speech came from Washington. No emergency votes spilled onto the public channels. No Terran ambassador shouted at the Galactic Council. Cargo lanes around Luna went dark one by one. Civilian ships received polite instructions to return to port. Weather satellites shifted their eyes upward. Deep under the Atlantic, old defense networks woke for the first time in 20 years and asked for command authorization. On the Council monitoring station above Mars, a junior alien analyst clicked his mandibles and said, "The humans are in shock." His supervisor, older and less amused, watched 3 American orbital carriers disappear from civilian tracking within the same minute and said nothing at all. In Colorado, Captain Daniel Hayes sat outside a sealed medical room with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped so tight the knuckles had gone white. He was 41, white, American, former Marine Corps, the kind of man who looked older when he was tired and younger when he smiled, though nobody in that hallway had seen him smile in a long time. The cuffs of his shirt had been scrubbed clean twice, but there was still a faint silver tint under one fingernail. He kept noticing it, kept rubbing it with his thumb until the skin burned. Behind the glass, Ambassador Leora Vin lay under soft white lights, her pale blue-silver skin dimmer than it had been that morning. Machines breathed in slow, careful rhythms around her. Daniel had spent half his life around military hospitals, but this was different. Soldiers knew the deal. They signed the papers. They understood the gamble. Leora had walked onto that stage because she believed words could stop men like Kaler Dravik from turning the galaxy into a cage. Daniel had been paid to make sure she walked back off it. He had failed by half a second. A nurse stepped beside him and held out a paper cup of coffee. "Captain Hayes," she said gently, "you should drink something." Daniel looked at the cup like he had forgotten what coffee was for. Did she wake up? Not yet. Then I am good. The nurse did not argue. Nobody argued with him that night. A few feet away, 2 Secret Service agents stood by the elevator, speaking in low voices. Beyond them, a television mounted to the wall showed nothing but the presidential seal and the words "emergency address pending." It had said that for 48 minutes. Daniel knew what that meant. Speeches were easy. Decisions took longer. His phone buzzed once. A message from Admiral Marcus Reed. 3 words. "Is she alive?" Daniel stared at the glass. Leora's fingers rested open on the blanket, fragile and still. Around her wrist was the cracked friendship bracelet Maggie Sullivan had given her in Iowa, the one made from blue yarn and plastic white stars. Daniel typed back with one thumb. "Yes, barely." The reply came almost immediately. "Then Earth waits." Daniel closed his eyes. In the silence, he could still hear Leora's voice from the stage, calm and bright, telling the council that humanity was not gentle because it lacked claws. It was gentle because it knew when not to use them. Somewhere above the planet, ships were moving without lights. Somewhere below it, presidents, generals, engineers, and exhausted parents were answering calls they had hoped would never come. Earth was not mourning quietly. Earth was deciding what kind of species it was going to be. 3 months before the silence, before the hospital room in Colorado, before Daniel Hayes learned how heavy a half-second could feel, Ambassador Leora Vin stepped onto American soil at Andrews Air Force Base and looked up at the gray morning sky like it was a miracle. Rain was coming down in a thin, steady sheet, the kind of cold spring rain that made reporters hunch their shoulders and soldiers pretend they were not uncomfortable. Leora did not hide from it. She lifted one elegant hand, let the drops touch her pale blue-silver skin, and smiled when the tiny lines beneath her cheeks gave off a soft glow. "Your planet leaks from the sky," she said through the translator clipped near her collar. A few people laughed. Daniel did not. He stood 10 feet to her right in a dark suit that never fit quite right over body armor, scanning rooftops, service trucks, press badges, hands in pockets, hands out of pockets, anything that did not belong. President McKenna had assigned him to Leora because he was careful, not friendly. That suited him fine. He had protected senators, generals, and one billionaire who complained that armored vehicles made him carsick. He knew how to stand near important people without caring about them. At least, that was what he told himself. Leora ruined that by caring first. At a diner outside Topeka, she sat in a red vinyl booth that was too small for her long frame and listened to a waitress explain pancakes like she was being briefed on sacred human technology. "So the butter is not structural?" Leora asked. The waitress blinked, then laughed so hard she had to set the coffee pot down. A little boy at the next table offered Leora a packet of maple syrup. His father apologized, but Leora accepted it with both hands. "Thank you, sir," she told the boy. "I will use it with honor." Daniel watched from beside the door, arms folded, trying not to smile. Later, outside, Leora asked him why the waitress called everyone honey. "It does not appear to be accurate," she said. "Most of them were not made of honey." Daniel glanced at her, then back at the parking lot. "It means she likes you. She likes everyone? That is kind of the point." Leora considered that for a long moment. Humans waste kindness on strangers. Sometimes. "No," she said softly. "Not waste. The trip should have been routine. Schools, memorials, hospitals, union halls, a baseball game in St. Louis where Leora stood during the national anthem because everyone else stood and she did not want to be rude. But something happened everywhere she went. People stopped treating her like a visitor from the stars and started treating her like someone who had come a long way to understand them. In Kansas City, she spoke with a firefighter who had lost 2 friends during a station collapse and asked him what made humans run into danger instead of away from it. He shrugged and said, "Somebody has to go." Leora repeated the phrase later in the car, almost to herself. Somebody has to go. In Iowa, Maggie Sullivan gave her a handmade bracelet with blue yarn and plastic white stars. Maggie was 12, nervous, and missing one front tooth. She asked if aliens were scared of the dark. The adults around them chuckled, but Leora crouched until they were eye level. "Yes," she said. "Very often." Maggie looked surprised. "What do you do?" Leora glanced toward Daniel, who was pretending not to listen. "I have learned that humans turn on lights for each other." That clip went everywhere by dinner. By midnight, half the country had seen it. By morning, Leora was on coffee mugs, classroom posters, late-night jokes, church bulletin boards, and homemade shirts that said "Our Alien" in glitter letters. Daniel hated the phrase at first. It sounded childish, like Earth had adopted a mascot. Then he saw Leora reading messages from ordinary people on her tablet after midnight, answering as many as she could with careful English and a tired smile. She was not performing affection. She was receiving it like something fragile she had been trusted to hold. One night in Denver, as snow dusted the hotel windows, Daniel found her alone in the hallway, looking down at Maggie's bracelet on her wrist. "You know this makes you a target," he said. Leora did not look away from the bracelet. "Being loved? Being visible?" She nodded slowly. "On my world, visibility belongs to rulers. On yours, it seems to belong to anyone brave enough to be kind in public." Daniel had no answer for that. He just stood beside her in the quiet, listening to the heating vents hum and the distant traffic move through the city below. For the first time since taking the assignment, he stopped thinking of Leora as a diplomatic asset. He thought of her as someone who believed humanity was better than its worst day, and that scared him more than any threat report ever had. By the time Leora returned to Mercy Spire, the council no longer spoke her name with polite curiosity. They said it like a problem. Her visit to Earth had been meant to soften humanity, to make the Death World species look grateful, manageable, and safely impressed by the older powers of the galaxy. Instead, it had done something worse. It had made humans feel seen. In the council archives, humanity was listed under careful language: emotionally volatile, technologically uneven, high endurance, high loyalty, dangerous under stress. Leora walked into the grand chamber and told them those notes were not wrong, just incomplete. "You keep studying what humans do when they are cornered," she said, standing beneath the cold blue light of the central dais. "You should study what they do when they are trusted." A few delegates shifted uncomfortably. Others looked bored. High Marshal Kaler Dravik watched from the Vark observation tier, one hand resting on the black rail in front of him, his expression carved into something that was almost a smile. He was broad, armored even when he was not in uniform, with dark copper skin and eyes that never seemed to blink at the same time. To him, kindness was not a virtue. It was a door left unlocked. Counselor Sin of the Triune leaned toward her microphone. Ambassador Van, your emotional attachment to Earth is becoming a diplomatic concern. Leora turned toward her. Respectfully, Counselor, it is only called emotional attachment when the species involved is young. When an older empire does it, you call it alliance. A low murmur moved through the chamber. Somewhere behind Leora, Daniel Hayes stood with the human security detail, dressed in a plain charcoal suit, earpiece tucked in, posture loose enough to look relaxed and tight enough to move fast. He did not enjoy council rooms. Too many doors. Too many balconies. Too many people pretending manners were the same thing as peace. Through the translator, Dravik finally spoke. Humans impressed you because they fed you sugar and gave you string bracelets. Leora looked at the blue yarn and white plastic stars around her wrist, then back at him. Humans impressed me because they give meaning to small things. That is usually how civilizations survive big ones. Daniel almost looked down, but he caught himself. A line like that would play well back home. It would also make enemies. After the session, he found Leora in a side corridor overlooking the docking rings. Hundreds of ships moved in quiet lanes beyond the glass. You are pushing them hard, he said. She folded her hands in front of her. They need to be pushed. Some people push back. I know. No. Daniel said, softer now. You know it as a diplomat. I know it as a guy who has had to walk people out through service doors because somebody in a nice room decided words were not enough. Leora studied him for a moment. Are you asking me to stop? Daniel glanced down the corridor. Two council guards stood near the lift, pretending not to listen. I am asking you to stop thinking being right makes you safe. That landed. He saw it in the faint dimming beneath her cheekbones. She wanted to argue, but she did not. On my world, she said, we are taught that fear is a private thing. Leaders do not show it. On mine, fear is useful if you listen to it before it has to yell. Leora smiled a little, but it did not reach her eyes. That sounds like something from a veteran support group. Close. My uncle said it after teaching me to drive in Boston. For the first time all day, she laughed. It was small, tired, and real. Neither of them saw the maintenance drone pause above the corridor light. Neither saw its lens narrow and send a clean copy of their conversation to a sealed Vark channel. Hours later, in his private command suite, Dravik listened to the recording twice. He did not care about the jokes or the bracelet or the human captain hovering near her like a guard dog that knew better than to bark. He cared about one sentence. Being right makes you safe. Dravik turned to his aide and said, she has become more valuable as a wound than as a voice. The aide hesitated. The council will object. Dravik looked back toward the stars, where Earth spun far away, loud and divided and sentimental. No, he said. They will pretend not to understand until it is too late. The next morning, Mercy Spire looked too perfect, and that was what bothered Daniel Hayes. The station floated between trade lanes like a cathedral made of glass and polished metal, all soft lights, clean floors, and quiet music meant to make powerful people feel civilized. Delegates moved through the main concourse in ceremonial robes, security drones hummed above them in gentle loops, and every announcement came in that calm airport voice Daniel had always hated. Nothing about it should have felt wrong. That was exactly why it did. Daniel stood outside the ambassadorial suite while Leora adjusted the small translator at her collar. The blue yarn bracelet from Maggie rested against her wrist, a little crooked, a little worn now from travel. You are staring at the hallway again, Leora said. Hallways are where problems usually start. On Earth. Everywhere. She smiled, but he did not return it. His eyes had moved to a maintenance worker near the far junction. Gray coveralls. Tool case in the left hand. Council badge clipped too low. The worker paused beside a wall panel for 3 seconds longer than the job required, then walked away without opening it. Daniel, Leora said quietly. What is it? I do not know yet. That was the honest answer, and he hated honest answers when they were useless. He tapped his earpiece. Hayes to Joint Security. I need a status check on Corridor 7, Camera Cluster 12, and the East Service Lift. A council security officer answered with smooth irritation. Captain Hayes, all systems are operating within approved parameters. That is not what I asked. Your concern is noted. Daniel looked toward Leora. They noted my concern. That sounds serious. It is council language for go bother someone else. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Should I cancel the address? The word yes sat in Daniel's mouth like a stone. He wanted to say it. He wanted to put her in an armored shuttle, take her back to Earth, and let every diplomat in the galaxy complain until their translators overheated. But Leora was not cargo. She was not a package he could move because his stomach felt wrong. She had chosen this speech because Dravik had spent weeks turning council members against Earth, and silence would make his lies look clean. Daniel checked the corridor again. If you cancel, he wins the room before you walk into it. And if I go, he glanced at the bracelet. Then I stay close. Leora studied his face for a moment. You are afraid. Daniel let out a short breath through his nose. I am employed. That is not an answer. It is the one I use at work. A faint warmth moved under her pale blue-silver skin, but it faded quickly. Beyond the suite doors, the station shifted into event protocol. The soft music stopped. The lights along the floor turned white, guiding delegations toward the central hall. Daniel watched 2 council guards change posts near the west entrance. They moved 8 minutes early. One of them looked at Leora and then looked away too fast. Daniel tapped his wrist unit and saved the timestamp. Captain, Leora said, more gently now. I have stood in rooms full of people who disliked me before. Dislike is loud, Daniel said. This is quiet. She did not answer right away. The doors opened, revealing the long walk to the grand chamber. Cameras waited at the far end. So did the council. So did Dravik, probably smiling from some shadowed balcony with clean hands and dirty intentions. Daniel moved first, 2 steps ahead, scanning faces, corners, reflections in glass. Leora followed with her shoulders straight and her hands folded in front of her like someone walking into church instead of danger. Halfway down the corridor, she said, Maggie will be watching from her school today. Daniel kept his eyes forward. Then give her a good speech. You think she will like it? She likes you. That is not the same thing. Leora almost smiled. Then the grand chamber doors opened, and every camera in the station turned toward her. Daniel felt the air change. Not colder, not louder, just wrong. He touched his earpiece one last time. Joint security, this is Hayes. I want an immediate lockdown option on my command. The answer came back after a pause that was half a second too long. Negative, Captain. Lockdown authority remains with Council Command. Daniel looked up at the balcony where Dravik stood in black ceremonial armor, watching Leora like a man admiring a trap after the door had already started to close. Daniel lowered his voice so only Leora could hear him. Stay where I can reach you. Leora stepped onto the white floor beneath the council lights. Always, she said, and walked toward the podium. Leora reached the podium beneath a ceiling of slow-moving lights, and for one strange second, the whole room seemed willing to pretend it was still a place built for peace. The council delegates settled into their tiers. The cameras adjusted. Across millions of screens on Earth, classrooms went quiet, coffee shops turned up the volume, and a little girl in Iowa leaned forward with both hands under her chin. Daniel Hayes stood 12 feet from the podium, close enough to see the tiny frayed edge of Maggie's bracelet against Leora's wrist. He kept one hand near his jacket, not touching the sidearm, not making a scene, just ready. Leora looked out over the chamber and began in careful English first, not through the translator. My friends on Earth taught me that strength is not the same as cruelty. A soft murmur passed through the alien tiers. Some respected the gesture. Some hated it. Daniel saw Dravik in the upper balcony, still as a statue, his dark eyes fixed on her like he already knew the ending. Leora continued, her voice steadier now. Humanity is not gentle because it lacks claws. It is gentle because it knows when not to use them. In Iowa, Maggie smiled. In the Oval Office, President McKenna stopped signing a briefing note and looked up at the screen. In the chamber, Daniel heard something shift behind the walls. Not an explosion, not a shout, just the wrong sound in the wrong place, like a lock turning when nobody had touched the door. His earpiece crackled once and went dead. Daniel moved before anyone else understood there was a reason to move. Leora down. She turned toward him, confused for only half a second. Then the chamber lights failed. The perfect white floor vanished into emergency red. Delegates cried out. Translation systems stuttered. The main doors sealed with a deep mechanical thud, and the council guards at the west entrance stepped back instead of forward. That told Daniel everything. This was not confusion. This was permission. Shapes dropped from the service galleries, fast and organized, wearing Vark black without insignia. Daniel reached Leora as the first wave of panic rolled through the chamber. He did not yell. He did not give some brave speech. He grabbed her shoulder, turned his body between her and the balcony, and started moving her toward the emergency alcove behind the dais. Stay with me, he said. Do not stop. Leora kept one hand on the bracelet. The broadcast. Forget the broadcast. The children are watching. That hit him harder than the alarms. He looked at her for a fraction of a second too long, and that was the half-second he would carry for the rest of his life. A Vark officer stepped into the light ahead of them, holding a signal device no larger than a phone. Daniel shoved Leora behind the podium and knocked the device away, but the message had already gone live. Dravik's voice poured through every open channel, calm and satisfied. Tell Earth their favorite alien learned her place. The chamber feed caught Leora falling out of frame, Daniel reaching for her, and Maggie's blue bracelet skidding across the polished floor until it stopped near the base of the podium. Then the signal cut. On Earth, nobody knew what had happened next. They only saw enough to understand the insult. In the chamber, Daniel got Leora behind the dais and pressed one hand gently to her shoulder. Look at me, he said, forcing his voice to stay even. Leora, look at me. Her eyes opened halfway. The glow beneath her skin was faint, but it was there. Did they see? She whispered. Daniel swallowed the answer he wanted to give. I am getting you out. Daniel. Her fingers closed weakly around the cracked bracelet. Do not let them make humans ashamed of loving someone. He stared at her, and the old cold part of him, the part that had survived war by locking every feeling behind a door, felt that door begin to bend. Around them, the council chamber shook with fear, but Daniel's voice stayed low. They made a mistake, he said. They thought love was the soft part. 48 hours after the Mercy Spire feed died, Earth gave the galaxy nothing. No speeches, no threats, no angry diplomats pounding on polished tables. The Terran embassy at the Galactic Council closed its doors, lowered its flag lights to half brightness, and stopped answering every call except medical traffic. To the older species, that looked like fear. On the Vark command net, officers joked that humans were emotional creatures who needed time to cry before they remembered how small they were. On Earth, nobody was joking. In Boston, a bar owner turned off the music and left the news on without sound because nobody wanted to hear commentators explain what they had all seen. In Dallas, a mother who had never cared about interstellar politics placed a candle beside her television and told her son to stop saying alien like it meant stranger. In Iowa, Maggie Sullivan sat in the principal's office with a school counselor, still wearing the little plastic star necklace Leora had admired during her visit. The counselor asked if she wanted to talk. Maggie stared at the floor and said, She asked me if I was scared of the dark. Then she started crying so quietly the counselor had to look away. Beneath all that grief, the machinery of Earth began to move. Not loudly, not with marching bands or patriotic speeches. Cargo ports shut down for maintenance that nobody had scheduled. Lunar shipyards went dark to outside sensors. Retired officers received phone calls from numbers that had not appeared on their screens in decades. In Washington, President Laura McKenna sat at the head of a long table beneath the White House, wearing the same navy jacket she had worn during the broadcast. Nobody had told her to change. Nobody had dared. Admiral Marcus Reed stood near the wall with a tablet in one hand, and the tired patience of a man who had spent his life preparing for a day he hoped would never arrive. How bad is she? McKenna asked. Alive, Reed said. The doctors will not promise more than that. The president closed her eyes for half a breath. And Captain Hayes? Debriefing in Colorado. Daniel Hayes had been in the same windowless room for 9 hours, answering every question twice. Where was Leora standing? When did the lights fail? Which guards moved first? Did Council Command deny lockdown? Did he hear Dravik before or after the signal override? He answered in a flat voice, hands folded on the table, jacket hanging over the back of his chair. He did not ask for a lawyer. He did not ask for sleep. He did not ask for coffee after the first cup went cold beside him. A woman from Federal Intelligence finally leaned forward and softened her tone. Captain, nobody here thinks you abandoned her. Daniel looked at her for the first time in almost an hour. Good. Then ask a useful question. The room went still. Admiral Reed, watching through the glass, almost smiled. The woman glanced at her notes. Did Ambassador Vin say anything after the broadcast cut? Daniel's jaw tightened. For a moment, he was back behind the dais, hearing alarms, feeling Leora's fingers close around that cracked bracelet. He saw the white floor. He saw the cameras. He saw every child in every classroom watching until the screen went black. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet the recorder barely caught it. She asked if the children saw. Nobody wrote anything down. The intelligence officer lowered her pen. Behind the glass, Reed turned away and took out his phone. 30 seconds later, in Washington, President McKenna received the message. She read it once, then again. Around the table, generals, cabinet members, and allied ministers waited for the kind of sentence that changes history. McKenna set the phone down with great care. They wanted us ashamed of loving her, she said. Make sure every government on Earth sees that transcript. One minister from Europe asked, and after that, the president looked toward the sealed doors, beyond which the world was still silent, grieving, and listening. After that, she said, we decide together whether Earth still knows where the line is. Leora woke up just before sunrise in Colorado, though there was no real sunrise in the room, only soft medical lights and the low hum of machines trying to sound less frightening than they were. Daniel Hayes was standing by the window with a paper cup of coffee he had not touched, watching the dark outline of the Rocky Mountains slowly turn blue. Behind him, the heart monitor changed rhythm. Not by much, just enough. He turned so fast the chair beside him scraped the floor. Leora's eyes were open, unfocused at first, then searching. Do not try to sit up, Daniel said, moving to the side of the bed. His voice came out rougher than he wanted. You are in Colorado. You are safe. Leora blinked slowly. The glow beneath her pale blue-silver skin was weak, like a flashlight with dying batteries. Earth? She whispered. Still here. The children. Daniel looked down for half a second. He had faced generals, grieving parents, and rooms full of people waiting for bad news. But that question nearly took his voice away. They saw enough, he said. Leora closed her eyes, and one tear slipped sideways toward her temple. Daniel reached for a tissue, clumsy with it, and she gave the smallest breath of a laugh. You look terrible, Captain. You should see the other guy. Her smile faded, but not all the way. I am sorry. Do not do that. Daniel. No. He leaned closer, keeping his voice low because the nurse outside the glass was already looking in. You do not apologize for surviving. Leora's fingers moved under the blanket, slow and careful, until they found the cracked bracelet around her wrist. Maggie said bracelets are for promises. Daniel nodded. Sounds like her. I made one. She turned her wrist with visible effort. Inside, Daniel stared at the bracelet. The blue yarn was frayed. One of the plastic stars had split down the middle. He had seen it a dozen times since Mercy's Spire and never noticed the tiny seam along the clasp. Leora swallowed, fighting pain she refused to name. Before the address, I found transfer logs. Vark ships, hidden behind humanitarian traffic. An occupation fleet outside the Sol approach lanes. Dravik did not attack me to end anything. He attacked me to measure what Earth would tolerate. Daniel's face went still. That was the part of him people mistook for calm. It was not calm. It was every feeling being locked behind one door, because there was finally something useful to do. Where is the data? Leora lifted her wrist again. In the promise. 2 hours later, Daniel walked into the United Earth Emergency Council beneath the White House, with the bracelet sealed in a clear evidence case. President McKenna sat at the center of the table, eyes red but steady. Around her were leaders from every major nation and orbital settlement, some on screens, some in the room, all too tired to pretend this was politics as usual. Admiral Reed stood near the wall, arms folded. Daniel placed the case on the table. Ambassador Vin hid the proof before they reached her. Nobody spoke while the technicians opened the cracked star and pulled the data free. The room filled with silent maps, ship movements, false medical routes, supply chains, encrypted orders, and finally Dravik's own authorization code. The occupation fleet was real. It had been waiting in the dark while Earth mourned. President McKenna watched until the final file closed. Then she removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, looking less like a president than a woman who had just reached the end of every peaceful road at once. If we answer separately, he picks us apart, said the Japanese prime minister from the screen. If we answer emotionally, the council calls us unstable, said the Nigerian president. Admiral Reed looked at McKenna. And if we do not answer? Daniel thought of Leora asking whether the children saw. He thought of Maggie's bracelet carrying a warning across the stars because a kind alien had trusted a child's promise more than the council's protection. McKenna looked around the table. Then every small, decent thing in this galaxy learns that Earth only protects its own skin. No one argued. Not because they all wanted war. Because the evidence had removed the luxury of pretending. McKenna turned to Reed. How many ships can leave Sol tonight? Reed did not smile. Enough to make Dravik regret asking the question. Daniel looked at the bracelet in the clear case, the little broken star still holding its shape. For the first time in 48 hours, he stopped hearing the feed cut to black. He heard Leora's voice instead, faint but alive, telling him that humans turn on lights for each other. And beneath Washington, while the world above still waited in silence, Earth began turning them on all at once. By noon, the first order went out, and every flag on Earth had to make room for one more. It was not a new nation. Nobody pretended humans had suddenly stopped arguing about borders, money, history, or who got blamed when things went wrong. The old flags stayed where they were, stitched on uniforms, painted on hangar walls, hanging outside schools and city halls. But above the command feeds, above the shipyard doors, above the emergency broadcast screens from Houston to Seoul, one symbol appeared beside them all. A blue planet on a black field, no words under it, because everyone already knew what it meant. United Earth Command came online at 12:07 Eastern Time. Daniel Hayes watched it happen from a briefing room at Peterson Space Force Base, still wearing the same suit from the council chamber because no one had found time to tell him to change. Around him, officers from countries that had spent entire centuries distrusting one another stood shoulder to shoulder over the same tactical table. An American colonel passed a tablet to a Chinese admiral without comment. A French logistics officer argued fuel routes with a Brazilian fleet captain like they had been doing it for years. A Nigerian orbital commander corrected an Australian weapons technician, and the technician just nodded and fixed the math. Nobody smiled. Nobody gave speeches. That was the strangest part. The room was full of people doing the most impossible thing humanity had ever done, and it sounded like a busy airport before a storm. Admiral Marcus Reed entered with President McKenna on the main screen behind him. Old Harbor Protocol is authorized, Reed said. A few people looked up. Most did not. They knew the name. Everyone in that room knew the name, though almost none had expected to hear it spoken outside a sealed training file. Reed set both hands on the table. This is not a revenge operation. Civilian populations are off limits. Medical routes stay open. Surrendered crews are protected. We are going after Dravik's command structure, his occupation fleet, and every person who signed off on the Mercy Spire operation. If anyone in this room wants a different kind of war, leave now. No one moved. Daniel looked down at the clear case holding Maggie's cracked bracelet. The little plastic star had done more than half the council ever had. It had told the truth. Across the planet, the quiet began to take shape. At Norfolk Orbital, carriers the council thought were museum platforms released their docking clamps and turned toward the moon. In the lunar yards, floodlights burned across miles of silver scaffolding as engineers pulled tarps off ships that had never appeared in any public registry. In Alaska, old radar dishes tilted toward deep space and started talking to satellites that had been sleeping under civilian names. In Lagos, a software team rewrote traffic control for 300 military and humanitarian vessels while eating cold takeout from paper cartons. In Iowa, Maggie Sullivan stood outside her school with the rest of her class as the principal lowered the flag to half-staff. A reporter asked her what she wanted the leaders of Earth to do. Maggie looked small inside her winter coat. "I want them to bring her home," she said. "And I want the people who hurt her to know she was not alone." That clip reached the command room 6 minutes later. No one played it twice. They did not have to. Daniel watched it once, then turned away before anyone could see his face. Reed noticed anyway. "Hayes," he said. Daniel straightened. "Sir, you are cleared for field command." Daniel looked at him. "You sure that is wise?" No, Reed said. But she trusts you, and Dravik knows your face. Both are useful. A technician handed Daniel a black equipment case. Inside was armor, a sidearm, a rifle, and a fresh patch with the blue planet on black cloth. For a moment, he just stared at it. He had worn plenty of patches in his life. Some had made him proud. Some had made him tired. This one felt heavier because it did not belong to one country, one service, or one old story men told themselves to make fear easier. It belonged to every parent who had watched the screen go black, every child who had made a bracelet, every tired nurse standing outside Leora's room, and one pale blue-silver woman who had believed humans could be kind without being harmless. Daniel pressed the patch onto his sleeve. Somewhere beyond Earth, Dravik was waiting for a divided species to argue itself into paralysis. Instead, the first United Earth fleet left Sol in complete silence, and every ship carried the same instruction: hold the line, protect the innocent, and bring back the truth. The United Earth fleet crossed into Vark space without music, without banners on the public feed, without a single captain promising glory to a camera. They moved like people carrying a sleeping child through a dark house, careful with every step because being strong did not give them permission to be careless. Dravik had prepared for rage. He had hidden civilians around command hubs, expecting humans to prove every ugly thing he had ever said about them. Instead, Earth cut power to military stations, jammed weapons locks, opened safe corridors for evacuation ships, and sent the same message on every channel in plain English: stay clear, stay alive, this is not your punishment. In his black command hall, Dravik watched his empire go silent one system at a time. No firestorm, no wild attack, just doors closing, signals failing, allies refusing his calls, and his own officers realizing the humans had not come to destroy his people. They had come for him. Daniel Hayes reached the inner command deck with a small United Earth team and a warrant signed by 37 governments, 3 orbital courts, and the emergency council Dravik had been so sure would tear itself apart. The High Marshal stood beside a window looking out at the stars, still trying to look larger than the moment. All this, Dravik said through the translator, for one alien who chose the wrong friends. Daniel did not raise his weapon. He did not step closer than he had to. His uniform was dusty, his eyes were tired, and the blue planet patch on his sleeve looked almost too simple in that room of black metal and old conquest. No, Daniel said. For the line you crossed. Dravik gave a thin smile. You expect the galaxy to fear your kindness now? Daniel looked at him for a long second. No, I expect it to stop mistaking kindness for permission. That was the last argument Dravik won in his own head. He was taken alive, in restraints, and delivered to the council he had tried to shame into silence. The trial lasted 12 days. Leora testified from Earth, her voice still weak, the glow under her pale blue-silver skin dimmer than before, but steady enough. She did not ask for revenge. She asked the council to remember that a civilization is measured not by how loudly it defends its borders, but by who it is willing to protect when there is no profit in it. After the verdict, the Leora Doctrine was signed. Any person under Earth protection, human or not, citizen or guest, soldier or child, diplomat or stranger, would be treated as someone whose life carried weight. Not because Earth owned them, because Earth had learned, the hard way, that love becomes cowardice only when it refuses to stand up. Weeks later, Leora returned to Iowa. She walked slowly into Maggie Sullivan's classroom with Daniel a few steps behind her, pretending he was only checking exits. Maggie did not wait for permission. She ran across the room and hugged Leora carefully, like she was holding something breakable and precious. The whole class stood up, not because a teacher told them to, but because children understand some things adults spend their lives making complicated. Leora touched the new bracelet on her wrist, blue yarn again, white stars again, one tiny plastic earth in the center. Did I come back correctly? She asked. Maggie wiped her face with her sleeve and nodded. You came back home. Daniel turned toward the hallway before anyone saw what that did to him. His phone buzzed. Admiral Reed had sent one message. Council wants to know if Earth is still at war. Daniel looked through the classroom window. He saw Leora laughing softly with the children. He saw Maggie showing her where the class had kept a desk empty for her. He saw a room full of small, ordinary lights, The kind humans kept turning on for each other even after the dark tried to teach them not to. He typed back, "Tell them Earth is watching." Then he put the phone away and let the sound of children laughing fill the silence that war had left behind.